Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Now in today's lecture, we're going to continue on with the video game industry, tackling a few things here, including nostalgia, including the Nintendo Switch, advertising, a little bit with mobile games, a little bit with freemium, and a little bit with what Disney has been doing with video games. So this is a little bit more about the different elements within the video game marketplace and how we can have video games appeal to people. So let's go into the first slide that we have here. Now, the Nintendo Switch was a very, very big innovation for Nintendo. After its faux pas with the Nintendo Wii U, in which people kind of thought that the Wii U was just a tablet, the Nintendo company went back and said, well, we need to do a better job of marketing this and really demonstrating that this is portable. The portability aspect was something that they were trying to capitalize on with the Nintendo Wii U, but it really didn't happen. What we can see here is that the Nintendo Switch is meant for people to bring along. If you Google an advertisement for the Nintendo Switch, you can see that people can play it. And you'll note in the bottom right screen, which is a screen for Zelda, you can see with the left-handed controller and the right-handed controller, people can play with both controllers simultaneously, or you can play with another person. And so both controllers have that kind of dexterity. E3, which is just a bullet point here, is a major LA convention. And while I don't have photos here of it, I highly implore you to Google E3. E3 is a major industry convention for the video game industry. It is the Entertainment Electronics Expo, and it is regularly held in Los Angeles. I had the pleasure of being there in 2017, and I was able to try a lot of the new video games that were coming out, including South Park's Fractured But Whole and the new Super Mario Odyssey video game as well. Let's go to the next slide. Product choice. As we can kind of see here, this is a shelf of video games. Now, what's most interesting about a product on a shelf in a store is that positioning a product is really important. In fact, some companies will pay just a little bit more money for a product to be shelved at eye level. I know that sounds ridiculous, but shelf space is very precious. It's the first thing that people see when they enter into a store. And so if a product is at eye level, it may increase the chances of being purchased. Granted, that comes with exceptions. So what we can see here is that the location in a store relative to other products is super important. Where products are located really should fit into consumers' mindsets. Now today, video games are usually located back in the electronics section. We really don't see them in the toy aisle anymore. This has been done for a few reasons. One, video game consoles cost about $300 to $400. I don't know that a child is going to go ahead and purchase it. These purchases are typically made by parents or, increasingly, by adults. The average age of a video game player, believe it or not, is about 35 years old. Yes, there are a lot of people in their late 20s and 30s who continue to play video games. And so a lot of video game companies know this, and so there has been a bevy of adult-oriented video games that have been offered in the marketplace. Things like the Grand Theft Auto series, and I'll let you guys Google that in your own time. But this impacts how people perceive video game consoles. Over the last decade, video game consoles have worked very hard to be perceived as something that adults can play. It was not too long ago in which anybody playing a video game past the age of 15 or 18 was kind of deemed a dork or maybe weird or maybe somebody who should probably go out and make friends, and who knows, maybe that's still the case. But for now, video game companies have spent loads of money trying to change the perception of consoles as something that is adult-oriented as well as child-oriented. Let's go to the next slide. Video game stores. Have you been to a video game store lately? Kind of dreadful. You walk into a video game store, you have video games that are kind of all over the place. You have video game stores that have these kind of stacked video games. Sometimes they're not even labeled properly. If you go into a GameStop, this is sometimes the case. No dissing GameStop here. But if you walk into the Nintendo store, it's a little bit more branded. We have items that are from video games. We have characters that are from video games. We have clothing, merchandise, other things. It's a little bit more organized. And so when we look at video game stores, one of the biggest problems here is that video game stores sometimes lose out with haptic experiences. And so haptic experiences state that holding something helps people have some sort of perceived ownership over it. If I hold a video game, I might feel as though it kind of belongs to me. We do this all the time when we're walking through a mall, right? We might pass by a kiosk and somebody might want to give us lavender lotion. It's always lavender lotion or something. They want us to hold the item in our hands because if they get it in our hands, we kind of start owning it. It's a very weird phenomenon, but it's been documented in other academic studies. Differently, we also have perceived risk to consider here when we're in a store. I don't know if the latest Mario game is something I'm going to like, but I can try it. I can play it. I would argue there may not be enough video game consoles in a video game store, but for those that are there, this allows an opportunity, or this allows consumers the opportunity to try out a video game, to see if they like it. And of course, while you're holding the handheld controller in your hand, you're also realizing whether or not you like the video game. Do you see yourself buying it? And do you have that ownership? If you perceive that kind of ownership, it brings you a step closer to making the purchase of the video game. If we look back at the PowerPoint itself, we can see that perceived risk is really what video game stores are trying to erode at. We want consumers to feel as though they know what's going on in the video game and that the purchase is a good one at that. Let's go to the next slide. Myths. And so these video game characters, as we can see here, probably but for Mario, all have a sword. It's no accident. So many myths that we have in society are based on old stories that we've heard. Could be from the Roman times, could be from the Grecian times, Greek gods and Roman gods and gods. We've developed superheroes, video game characters, and a whole host of other people really from a lot of these old stories. And myths really serve as a way to uphold and emphasize and underscore cultural ideals. The ideals that we hold in a particular country. And so, for instance, if we think about the United States, some of the things we uphold is freedom and doing good and helping others, and also individualistic goals, probably more so than other Eastern countries that probably favor communal good over individual good. Here in the United States, we favor individual good usually over communal good. And so it becomes very clear that if we look at a lot of the video game characters that we play as, we document their points, the coins that we collect, other goods and items that we might collect in the course of playing a video game. We're able to measure ourselves. We value that. And so it manifests in a lot of different video games. If we look back at the slide, we can also see that between Sora, who is in the bottom right corner of the Kingdom Hearts series, Cloud in the bottom left corner of the Final Fantasy series, and in the top right corner, Link of the Zelda series, and of course, in the top left portion, Mario and his brother Luigi of the Mario series. All of these gentlemen share a few traits that are similar. For one, they all have weapons. Now, although Mario doesn't traditionally have a weapon, he does have the ability to fly sometimes, and he does have the ability to spit fire sometimes. And so he is also endowed with weapons. And so these gentlemen are heroes, right? They're equipped to fight evil, they're equipped to fight villains, and they're able to save the day, so to speak, to be heroes, to be heroic, to take risks. We believe in these ideals, and they manifest in these video games. Now, with all of these stories, we've heard them before. Ever since King Kong came out in the early 20th century, we know about the damsel in distress. Even before King Kong, we've heard the story of heroes saving the day. Unfortunately, we've had more female heroes or heroines come up in video game lore. Why do we replay these stories? We already know how this goes. The hero's going to save the day, maybe rescue the princess, and all will be well. Why do we bother? We already know what's going to happen. I mean, we're playing as the video game character. Why even bother playing the video game? Why do we gravitate over and over to the same storylines? Well, for one, it's something that's familiar to us. Two, because we know how the story's going to go, we can actually focus on other video game elements. Let's face it, if you have to be trained on what to do in a video game, it means that you have to learn more and more before you can effectively play the video game. If you know that you're a hero with a sword and shield, it becomes a lot easier to move through the video game. And while we might know what we have to do in a video game, and while we know that there might be a villain and we might have to collect a sword and shield or items or beat a boss, the goal isn't really to know what's going to happen, but how it's going to happen. How are we going to beat a villain? How are we going to collect items? And so that really becomes the crux, the fulcrum of why we play video games. We want to see how we're going to do this amount of work. We know what we're going to do. We just want to know how we're going to do it. That's where the interest lies. And if you really think about it, that goes with film and television as well. We've watched a lot of content about saving the day or other common tropes in entertainment. But the fact is, we know that Batman's going to beat Joker. But how? That's what keeps audiences engaged. Let's go to the next slide. If we look at nostalgia, Nostalgia, and Disney Interactive, we have a few things here to consider. And I really do implore you to look up Disney's Castle of Illusion, 1989, and the 2013 version, as well as Disney's DuckTales and Kingdom Hearts 3. Disney does an excellent job with nostalgia. But what is nostalgia? Nost, like nosotros in Spanish, means us or we. And algia means homecoming or pain. And so if we think about nostalgia, it means homecoming, a painful homecoming. If you think about it, look at a family heirloom. Look at something that your grandparents gave you, or maybe something that your parents gave you when you were little, or walk by the old street that you used to live on. It's bittersweet, isn't it? Nostalgia is kind of a bittersweetness. And so while we look at things that we've owned in the past and we have old connections to, it makes us happy because we're transported to a time that probably was a lot simpler than what we have to grapple with now. And so nostalgic items, things that kind of conjure up nostalgia, make us happy because we kind of are transported back to those times, but it's a bittersweetness as well because we really can't get back there. And so nostalgia has been found to really reinvigorate consumers. And so we find it as a way in which to kind of step back conceptually into a time and space that was a lot easier for us to deal with. It helps us when we get back into reality to deal with the obstacles of being an adult or anything else that we have to grapple with. And so if we look back at the nostalgia slide, we can see that old products may be perceived to have better quality. Consumers have stronger relationships with nostalgic brands as well. So reconjuring, bringing back, summoning up old things is a very, very lucrative market. And it is something that a lot of video game console companies have been in tune with as of late. Now, as of this airing in 2018, it has been some 30 years since the first modern console, Nintendo Entertainment System, came out. So if we think about it, in 1985, somebody who was playing the NES might have been 10 years old. 33 years later, in 2018, that same child is now 43 years old. Might he or she have a child? Probably. And so video game console companies are in a very, very interesting space in which they can share old video games and try to get children, as well as parents, back to playing old video games. Parents enjoy sharing things from their childhood. I know that my own father shared with me smooth jazz, Aerosmith rock and roll, basketball, things that he was passionate about. And in the same vein, a lot of parents tend to do this with other things as well. And so if you think about it, if video game companies like a Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft do their due diligence over the next few years, they can really open up a marketplace for this. And in fact, they have. Let's go to the next slide. Nostalgia and Twitch. And so Twitch, somewhat unrelated to this, is a video game website in which you are able to watch people play video games. But on that site, people have actually also started playing old video games. Going back to nostalgia, we have the NES Classic Edition. This was released in the fall of 2017, and if you watch the commercial, it in fact has all of the old video games. You can see on the box we have Super Mario, Metroid, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Zelda, Kirby's Adventure, and many, many others. Sega also came out with a classic video game console as well. And Nintendo is rumored to be putting out a classic edition of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, due to bow either this year or in 2019. This rush to purchase something like this kind of makes sense in a lot of ways. For one thing, these consoles are way less expensive than the new, updated, modern video game consoles. And they serve as kind of a novelty toy in which you're able to play a lot of different video games. It does come preloaded. The console is way smaller than the original, but it does allow for people to get together and to play and to revisit nostalgia. Let's go to the next slide. Going based on our previous conversation of Twitch, watching gamers has become a super lucrative way for companies to advertise to consumers. Who we have in the top left corner is none other than PewDiePie. And in the bottom left, we have Markiplier. These bizarre names are, one, real, and two, are indicative of two super successful video game players. These gentlemen have played many different video games. They have reviewed them, and so many people follow them. And they have made tens of millions of dollars playing video games and recording themselves playing video games. Let's go to the next slide. Virtual reality is something that has been terribly big in the last few years. I was recently in Los Angeles on a TV fellowship, but nevertheless, virtual reality people came in to talk to us not only about television, but also video games. Now, an important distinction should be made about virtual reality and AR as well, kind of artificial reality. So first, virtual reality, the world is cut off. As we can see with the young lady in the photo, the world is cut off. That is virtual reality. Her whole 360 view has been manipulated here. She has a headset on. Differently, artificial reality, we're putting virtual reality elements in society. If you play Pokemon Go, or if you are on Instagram or Snapchat and you put a wreath around your head, or if you give yourself dog ears or cat ears, that's a kind of artificial reality. We also have InstaVR iPhones, which also allow for users to create different kinds of reality. Now, a lot of virtual reality companies are also looking into their own set of key performance indicators. In marketing, in advertising, KPIs, as they're affectionately known as, are indicators of how well a particular brand, product, or service is doing. And so when I was in industry, KPIs included brand loyalty, brand awareness, and a few other kinds of measurements. For virtual reality companies, they're most interested in measuring consumers' minutes played, engagement measure, how engaged they were, how much they interacted with the world, and heat maps. Heat maps measure where people are looking the most in a virtual reality world. Now, one of the problems that some of the companies mentioned was that even though virtual reality right now is awesome, a lot of people, one, don't turn around and look back. So that also kind of impacts the design of virtual reality. If people aren't going to look back and kind of see what's going on, then there may not be as much to innovate in a particular world. The other issue is that if a Starbucks, a Verizon, a Honda comes to a virtual reality company and wants to create some sort of campaign that's virtual reality-esque, do we need it? That's the other question here. As a lot of companies are very interested in virtual reality, the question is, when do we need it? Does Starbucks need a virtual reality advertisement? I don't know that coffee is that complicated. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Could a Honda benefit from a virtual reality campaign? Sure. At the very least, people could kind of get a sense of what it's like to drive the car. So as we can see across many different product categories, virtual reality might be necessary, but it might not be as well. It has yet to be determined what's going to go on. I have the pleasure of personally working with a virtual reality company in California, and I look forward to kind of testing some of their content with students. But as they've said themselves, it's an elusive medium, and everybody's just trying to wrangle it at the current moment. Let's go to the next slide. So with virtual reality, the question is, once again, how to get audiences engaged. You want to give audiences agency. Agency means you want to endow or give audiences the ability to kind of manipulate their environment. You want them to feel that they have agency, that they have something to do in the virtual world. They can control it, they can manipulate it. If there's a ball in the virtual reality world, can I pick it up? Can I bounce it? Can I throw it against the wall? Can I defeat enemies with it, perhaps? All of that falls under agency. You want to empower people as they are playing the game. Original virtual reality series are being created for YouTube, Google, and Hulu as of this moment. And like I said, it's important to know when VR is right for a project and when it isn't. Virtual reality kind of has two markets right now. There is the in-home market in which people who have the virtual reality gear can go ahead and play it. I definitely implore all of you to Google virtual reality Resident Evil 7 on YouTube and watch people scream. I am one of those people. Fortunately, nobody recorded it, but when I put on a virtual reality headset to play the horror-themed video game Resident Evil 7, I can promise you that I screamed at a very high decibel during some moments. The other marketplace for virtual reality is external virtual reality. People go to maybe malls or theme parks to play virtual reality games or to go on virtual reality endowed rides. To get a brand to pay for VR is difficult because, again, the problem is, what is the bang factor here? Are brands getting their bang factor if they're doing a virtual reality commercial or advertisement or show or anything to get people involved? So certainly this medium has a lot, to be determined for the future. Most people say that with virtual reality, you can charge a flat fee for it or you can do freemium. Freemium is a kind of video game marketing tactic in which you offer people a piece of the video game for free. If people get addicted, kind of like people might get addicted to a drug or something, you hope that you can get them and convince them to pay. It's not the best model for now, but it is something that at least has encouraged the most invested video game players to pay for content and to go ahead and help companies evolve and get involved in developing video games further and further. Let's look at the next slide. So, for virtual reality, there are quite a few games that are available. Boogeyman and Annabelle. Annabelle is a very, very interesting video game as it was based on the Annabelle film created by Warner Brothers. And so, as I am wrapping up this lecture, I really do recommend that you Google Annabelle Virtual Reality by Warner Brothers. It is a virtual reality snippet of the movie, and you're able to kind of twist around in 3D and really experience a lot of different elements from the movie itself. Well, that'll do it for Late Night Learning. Thank you so much for being a part of this episode. Keep laughing and keep learning.